In my neighborhood, the things that kill you always knock first. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. I learned it when I was 6 years old, watching Mrs. Valdez from across the street open her door at 3:47 in the morning. I remember because my nightlight had gone out and I was too scared to get out of bed, so I just sat there staring out my window, waiting for morning. That's when I saw her porch light flick on. She came to the door in her bathrobe, hair all messy from sleep, and she just opened it without looking through the peephole or asking who was there. The gentleman in gray walked in, tall and thin, and wearing that old-fashioned suit he always wears. And by the time the sun came up, Mrs. Valdez's house was empty. Nobody ever said her name again after that. Not because we forgot her or anything, but because saying the name of someone the gentleman took meant he'd remember you existed too. And trust me, you don't want that. That's just life in Ridgemont Heights. We've got rules here, lots of them, and if you follow them, you're perfectly fine. Break them, and well, there's plenty of things just waiting around for you to slip up. My name's Casey Brennan, and I'm 17. I've lived here my whole life, up in these mountains in western Pennsylvania, where the fog comes in so thick every morning you can barely see your own mailbox until noon. To anyone driving through, we probably look totally normal. Just another suburban neighborhood with nice houses and mowed lawns and a community center that has a pool nobody uses once the sun goes down. Regular stuff. Except we're not regular at all. Ridgemont Heights has things living here with us. I already mentioned the gentleman in gray. Then there's the hanging woman who shows up in your rearview mirror if you're driving alone past midnight on Thornhill Road, just hanging there from nothing, swaying like there's a breeze even though your windows are up. There's the counting children who stand outside your bedroom window on the first Tuesday of every month. And you better count along with them out loud, or they'll start counting your heartbeats instead, and they won't stop until your heart does. There's the hum that comes up from the storm drains when it rains hard, this low, vibrating sound that gets into your bones. And you absolutely cannot hum back or try to match the pitch because then it knows you hear it, and it'll want to teach you the rest of its song. I know how this sounds. Terrifying, right? But here's the thing that people from outside never understand. It's actually not that bad. Every single one of these things has rules. Simple ones mostly. Don't open your door between 3 and 4 in the morning no matter who's knocking. Don't drive Thornhill Road by yourself after midnight. When the counting children show up, count with them. Don't hum or whistle or make any musical sounds near storm drains when it's raining. See? Easy to remember, easy to follow. My older brother Ryan used to tell me we were actually pretty lucky. At least our monsters are predictable, Case, he'd say while we walked to school together, passing the Whitmore house where the walls sometimes bled on Thursdays, and Mr. Whitmore would just be out there on his porch drinking coffee like nothing was weird. At least we know exactly what to do. Ryan was the best at following rules. He kept this notebook, this thick black journal where he wrote down every single rule about every single thing in Ridgemont Heights. He'd cross-reference them, date them, organize them by danger level. Whenever someone learned a new rule, usually because they messed up and barely survived, Ryan would add it to his collection. Like when Old Man Pritchard whistled near the big oak tree where Maple Street and Pine Avenue meet and got stuck in the branches for 3 days straight, couldn't climb down no matter what he did, until he finally stopped whistling and apologized to the tree. Ryan wrote that one down with a note that said, "No whistling near oak tree at Maple and Pine," in all capitals, and underlined it 3 times. When the Kowalski twins left their shoes pointing toward their beds one night and woke up to find the Stitcher standing over them with that horrible needle and thread, Ryan documented exactly how they'd placed their shoes and added a diagram and everything. That was 2 years ago when Ryan was still in high school with me, before he graduated and went off to college in the city, Pittsburgh. He got accepted to the university there on a full scholarship. and man, we were all so proud of him. Ryan was the smart one, the one who was going to get out and do something big with his life. He'd call home every single week, though, always on Sunday afternoons around noon, and he'd always start the conversation the same way. "Hey, Case, what's up? Any new rules I should know about?" And I'd tell him whatever had happened that week. Like if someone discovered you couldn't let your dog bark near the old Henderson place after the sun went down, or if someone figured out that the scratching sounds in the attic on Wednesday nights meant you needed to leave a glass of milk on the top step of your stairs, Ryan would write it all down on his end, keeping his notebook updated even though he was miles away. Last time we talked was 6 weeks ago, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. I remember because Mom had made corned beef and cabbage for dinner. Ryan called right on schedule at noon, and he sounded exhausted. His voice was all rough, and he kept yawning while we talked. He told me he had midterms coming up and some big research paper due, and he was stressed out about it. I told him about what happened to Mr. Fisher's dog, this little terrier that wouldn't stop barking at the Henderson place one evening, and then just vanished, and how we all learned that pets need to stay quiet near abandoned houses once it gets dark. "Write that down for me, Case," Ryan said, and I could hear him yawning again. God, I'm so tired. I can barely keep my eyes open. "You should get some sleep," I told him. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I will. I'll call you next week, okay?" "Okay. Love you, Ryan." "Love you too, Case." That was the last time I ever heard my brother's voice, and I replay it in my head every single day, wondering if there was something in the way he sounded that should have told me something was wrong. He didn't call the next Sunday. Mom kept checking her phone, waiting for it to ring, but it never did. By Monday, she was worried enough to call him. His phone went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Always the same thing. Finally, she called his roommate, some guy named Derek, and Derek said Ryan had been acting really weird lately, sleeping all the time, missing classes, barely leaving his room. Derek said he'd assumed Ryan had gone home because he hadn't seen him in a few days. But Ryan wasn't home. He'd never come home. Mom and Dad got in the car that same afternoon and drove the 3 hours to Pittsburgh. I stayed behind because I had school, but Mom called me that night and I could hear in her voice that something terrible had happened before she even said the words. They'd found Ryan in his dorm room. He was alone. His roommate had actually moved out weeks before, and Ryan had been living by himself all that time, and nobody had really noticed. The campus police told my parents that Ryan had been found unresponsive in his bed. There were needle marks on his arm. The medical examiner's report used a lot of complicated words that I had to look up later on my phone. Acute intoxication, respiratory depression, fentanyl-laced heroin. But the word that really mattered, the one that made everything real, was simple overdose. They brought Ryan home in a casket 3 days later. The funeral was on a Saturday morning, gray and cold with that same thick fog we always get. It felt wrong somehow, having a funeral for Ryan in a place where death was supposed to make sense, where death had rules. The church was full of people from the neighborhood, all of them dressed in black, all of them looking at my parents with these sad eyes. They kept coming up to us, shaking our hands, hugging my mom while she cried into their shoulders. They brought casseroles and flowers and sympathy cards with angels on them. Mrs. Patterson from next door grabbed my hand in both of hers, squeezing tight. She leaned in close and whispered, "At least it wasn't one of ours, sweetheart. At least he didn't break any rules here." I just nodded because I didn't know what else to do. Everyone kept saying things like that. At least he was away when it happened. At least he was safe from the things here. At least he got out of Ridgemont Heights. Like dying somewhere else made it better somehow. Like the location mattered more than the fact that my brother was gone. The pastor talked about Ryan like he'd known him, but he hadn't really. He used words like bright future and tragic loss, and senseless tragedy, and none of it felt right. None of it felt like Ryan. After the service, we went to the cemetery on the hill overlooking town, and they lowered the casket into the ground while Mom sobbed and Dad just stood there staring at nothing, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. I couldn't cry. I wanted to, but the tears wouldn't come. I just felt numb and cold and confused. This wasn't how things were supposed to work in Ridgemont Heights. When someone died, you knew why. You knew exactly what rule they'd broken. Like when Tommy Henderson went into the basement during the blood moon last year and the thing down there took him. We all knew Tommy had broken the rule. We all knew he'd been warned. It was terrible and sad, but it made sense. This didn't make sense. After the funeral, people came back to our house. They filled up our living room and kitchen, eating food and talking in quiet voices. I couldn't stand being around them, so I went up to my room and shut the door. That's when I saw it sitting on my bed. Ryan's notebook, the black journal where he'd kept all the rules. Mom must have put it there. I picked it up and saw his handwriting, neat and careful, with the date from 5 years ago when he'd started keeping track. Page after page of rules, all organized and numbered. Rule number 1, never open your door between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Rule number 2, don't drive Thornhill Road alone after midnight. Rule number 3, count with the counting children. On and on and on, dozens of rules, maybe hundreds. I flipped through the pages, reading Ryan's notes in the margins, little comments he'd made to himself. Confirmed by Mrs. Valdez incident, 2019, next to rule number 1. Saw the hanging woman myself, terrifying, but she didn't approach, next to rule number 2. The Kowalski twins were lucky, always check shoe placement, next to rule 37. There were newer entries too, ones from after Ryan had gone to college. He'd called me for those. I recognized my own experiences in his words. The note about Mr. Fisher's dog was there near the end, dated March 17th, the day of our last phone call. He'd planned to come home and tell people. He'd planned to keep everyone safe, even from far away. That was Ryan, always thinking about the rules, always trying to protect people. I sat on my bed holding that notebook for hours, reading every page, and that's when it really hit me. That's when I understood something that made my whole body go cold. Ryan had died because he broke a rule, just like Mrs. Valdez, just like Tommy Henderson, just like everyone else who'd ever died in Ridgemont Heights. The only difference was that nobody had written this rule down. Nobody had warned him about it. Nobody even knew it existed until it was too late. There were no entries in Ryan's notebook about drugs, no warnings about addiction, no rules for how to spot when someone you love is slipping away into something dark and dangerous. The notebook was full of information about supernatural things, about monsters and creatures and strange occurrences. But there was nothing about the real dangers that existed everywhere, not just in Ridgemont Heights. The dangers that didn't knock first. The dangers that didn't follow patterns you could predict. I grabbed a pen from my desk, my hand shaking, and I flipped to the first blank page in Ryan's notebook. I started writing. My handwriting looked messy and wrong next to Ryan's neat print, but I didn't care. Rule unknown, the thing that took Ryan doesn't have a name we can avoid saying. It doesn't appear at specific times. It doesn't announce itself. It just takes people quietly, slowly, while everyone thinks they're just tired or stressed or going through something normal. No one knows the rules because there don't seem to be any rules. No one knows how to stop it. I stared at what I'd written, and then I crossed it all out. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't helpful. How do you write a rule for something you don't understand? How do you protect people from something that doesn't follow any patterns? That night, after everyone left and the house got quiet, I could hear my mom crying in her bedroom down the hall. These soft, broken sounds that made my chest hurt. Dad's voice was there too, low and murmuring, trying to comfort her. I pulled my blanket up to my chin, and wished more than anything that I could go back to being 6 years old, watching Mrs. Valdez's house from my window, scared of the gentleman in gray, but at least understanding what I was afraid of. The next morning was Sunday. I woke up, and for just a second, I forgot Ryan was gone. I thought about how he'd be calling at noon like he always did. Then I remembered, and the emptiness hit me all over again. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table when I came downstairs, still in her bathrobe even though it was almost 10. She had a cup of coffee in front of her that had gone cold. She wasn't drinking it, just staring at it. Dad was at the stove making eggs that nobody would eat. "Morning, sweetheart," Mom said when she saw me, but her voice was flat and distant. "Morning," I said. We sat there in silence while Dad put plates in front of us. The eggs got cold. None of us touched them. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, getting closer and closer to noon, and I knew we were all thinking the same thing, that Ryan should be calling, that the phone should ring any minute now and we'd hear his voice asking if there were any new rules he should know about. The clock hit 12, and the phone didn't ring, and Mom got up and left the table without saying anything. I heard her bedroom door close. Dad looked at me. His eyes were red and tired. "You doing okay, Case?" I shook my head. "No." "Yeah," he said. "Me neither." He cleared the plates, and I went back up to my room with Ryan's notebook. I sat at my desk and opened it again, staring at that blank page where I'd tried to write a rule and failed. I picked up my pen and tried again. But the words wouldn't come. How do you write rules for something invisible? Something that doesn't tap on windows or count outside your bedroom or wait for you to make a mistake? I put the pen down and closed the notebook, frustrated and angry and sad, all at the same time. School started back up on Monday. I didn't want to go, but Mom insisted. I walked to school alone for the first time in years. Ryan had always walked with me before he graduated, and even after he left for college, I'd gotten used to walking by myself, but knowing he was out there somewhere, just a phone call away. Now he wasn't anywhere. The hallways at school felt too loud, too crowded. Everyone knew what had happened. People kept looking at me with these pitying expressions, and some of them would come up and say they were sorry about Ryan, and I'd just nod and say thank you, even though I didn't feel thankful for anything. My best friend Jen found me at my locker before first period. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there next to me. Then she said, "You want to talk about it?" "Not really," I told her. "Okay," she said, "but I'm here if you change your mind." I appreciated that. Jen had lived in Ridgemont Heights her whole life, too. She understood about the rules, about how things worked here. But this was different, and I didn't know how to explain it to her. At lunch, I sat with Jen and a couple other people from our group. They were talking about normal stuff, about homework and some video game that was coming out and plans for spring break. I picked at my food and didn't say much. Then Tyler Morrison, who sat 2 tables over, suddenly got up and ran to the bathroom. His girlfriend Emma looked worried and went after him. "What's that about?" someone asked. Jen lowered her voice. "I heard he's been having panic attacks lately. Like really bad ones. His mom took him to the doctor last week." "Stress from school?" another kid asked. "Maybe," Jen said. "Or maybe he saw something. You know how it is." Everyone nodded. Yeah, we knew. Sometimes people saw things in Ridgemont Heights that messed them up, even if those things didn't actually hurt them. Just seeing the gentleman in gray from a distance could give you nightmares for weeks. Hearing the hum from the storm drains could make you anxious about rain. It was part of living here. But something about what Jen said bothered me. I thought about Tyler, about how pale he'd looked, how his hands had been shaking when he ran past our table. I thought about Ryan, and how Derek had said he'd been acting weird, sleeping all the time, missing classes. I thought about the needle marks on Ryan's arm. After school, I went to the library instead of going straight home. I sat down at one of the computers and started searching. I typed in drug addiction signs and started reading. The articles talked about changes in behavior, sleeping too much or too little, missing work or school, withdrawing from friends and family, needle marks, weight loss, mood swings. I read through page after page, and with every symptom I read, I remembered something about Ryan. How tired he'd sounded on the phone those last few months, how he'd stopped calling as often, how when he did call, he'd sounded distant, distracted. I thought he was just stressed about school. We all had. I found articles about fentanyl, about how it was being mixed into other drugs, about how you couldn't tell just by looking if something was laced with it, about how just a tiny amount could kill you, about how it was everywhere now, killing people in cities and small towns, killing teenagers and adults, killing people who thought they were being careful. There were stories about families who'd lost people, parents talking about their kids who died, friends remembering people they'd loved. All of them said basically the same thing. They hadn't known. They hadn't seen it coming. They'd thought their person was just going through a rough patch, just dealing with stress, just being a normal college kid or a normal adult with normal problems. By the time the library closed at 6, I had filled 5 pages of a notebook with information, signs to look for, warning behaviors, ways to help someone, numbers for hotlines and treatment centers. It wasn't the same as Ryan's notebook with its neat rules and clear instructions, but it was something. When I got home, Dad was making dinner and Mom was sitting on the couch staring at the TV even though it wasn't on. I sat down next to her and she put her arm around me and we just sat there together in the quiet. After a while she said, "I keep thinking about all the times he called and said he was tired. I just thought it was school. I should have known something was wrong." "We all should have," I said. "But I'm his mother," Mom said, and her voice cracked. "I'm supposed to know. I'm supposed to protect him." I didn't know what to say to that. In Ridgemont Heights, parents taught their kids the rules. They kept them safe from the gentlemen and the counting children and all the other things that could hurt them. But how do you teach rules that don't exist? How do you protect someone from something you can't see coming? That night I had a nightmare. I dreamed I was 6 years old again, looking out my window at Mrs. Valdez's house. But this time when the door opened, it wasn't the gentleman in gray standing there. It was Ryan. He walked into Mrs. Valdez's house and the door closed behind him, and I tried to scream but no sound came out. I tried to run to warn him, but my legs wouldn't move. I just had to watch as the house went dark and empty, and Ryan disappeared. I woke up sweating, my heart pounding. It was 3:30 in the morning. Almost time for the gentleman's hour. I got out of bed and went to my window, looking out at the street. Everything was quiet and still, fog hanging in the air like it always did. I watched the houses, waiting to see if any lights would come on, if any doors would open. At 3:47, just like clockwork, I heard a knock. Not on my door, but somewhere down the street. I couldn't tell which house. The sound echoed in the fog. I held my breath and waited, watching. A light came on at the Martinez house 4 doors down. I saw a movement through their window, but then the light went off, and nothing happened. They hadn't opened the door. They'd followed the rule. I stood there until 4 o'clock when the gentleman's hour was over, when it was safe again. Then I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that knock, about how everyone in Ridgemont Heights knew not to answer. It was such a simple rule, so easy to follow. And yet Mrs. Valdez had opened her door anyway, and now she was gone. Why had she opened it? That question kept running through my mind as I lay there in the dark. Mrs. Valdez had lived in Ridgemont Heights for 20 years before she died. She knew the rules as well as anyone. Better than most, actually. So why would someone that careful, that knowledgeable, break the most basic rule we had? Maybe she'd been half asleep and forgot. Maybe she thought it was an emergency. Maybe she'd just had a moment of weakness, of not thinking clearly, and that one moment was all it took. I thought about Ryan again, about how smart he was, how careful he'd always been with the rules. If anyone should have been safe from making stupid mistakes, it was him. But something had happened in that college dorm, something that made him stop being careful, something that made him pick up a needle even though he had to have known it was dangerous. The sun came up eventually. I got dressed for school, even though I felt like I hadn't slept at all. Downstairs, Mom was already up, drinking coffee and staring out the kitchen window. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "Morning, honey," she said when she saw me. "Morning. There's cereal in the pantry if you want it." I poured myself a bowl but barely touched it. We sat there together in silence until it was time for me to leave for school. Mom hugged me at the door, holding on a little longer than usual. "Be safe," she said. "I will. I always follow the rules." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know you do, sweetheart." Walking to school, I passed the old Henderson place. It sat empty and dark like it had for years. The house had been abandoned so long that the yard was overgrown with weeds and the windows were all broken. Kids used to dare each other to go inside. But after what happened to Tommy Henderson last year, nobody went near it anymore, especially not after dark. I thought about Mr. Fisher's dog, how it had barked at that house and vanished, how we'd learned a new rule from that, how Ryan had written it down, planning to tell people so they could stay safe. He'd still been trying to protect people even when he was falling apart himself. At school, I saw Tyler Morrison again. He looked worse than yesterday, dark circles under his eyes, his skin pale and clammy. He sat in the back of our history class and kept his head down the whole time, barely moving. When the bell rang, he was the first one out the door. Jen caught up to me in the hallway. "Tyler's really not doing well," she said quietly. "Emma told me he's been having those panic attacks almost every day now, sometimes multiple times a day." "Has he told anyone what's causing them?" I asked. "He won't talk about it. Emma thinks maybe he saw something he shouldn't have. Maybe looked at the gentleman or made eye contact with the hanging woman or something." I watched Tyler disappear around the corner, and something in my gut twisted. "What if it's not that?" I said. "What do you mean?" "What if it's something else? Something that doesn't have anything to do with the things here?" Jen looked at me confused. "Like what?" I wanted to tell her about everything I'd learned at the library, about the articles I'd read, about addiction and drugs and how it could happen to anyone. But the words stuck in my throat, because saying it out loud would make it more real, and I wasn't ready for that yet. "Never mind," I said. "I'm probably just being paranoid." But I couldn't stop thinking about it. All day, I watched Tyler whenever I saw him in the halls or the cafeteria. I watched other kids too, looking for the signs I'd read about. Changes in behavior, withdrawal, physical symptoms. And the more I looked, the more I started seeing things that scared me. Sarah Hendricks, who used to be one of the loudest, most energetic people in our grade, had gotten quiet and withdrawn over the past few months. She sat alone at lunch now, barely eating. Michael Torres had lost a ton of weight and was always falling asleep in class. His grades had dropped from A's to D's. Jessica Park had stopped showing up to basketball practice, stopped hanging out with her friends, and I'd seen her scratching at her arms compulsively during English class. Maybe it was all nothing. Maybe Sarah was just going through a phase. Maybe Michael was staying up too late playing video games. Maybe Jessica had eczema or something. Or maybe they were all dealing with the supernatural things that came with living in Ridgemont Heights. But what if they weren't? What if something else was happening? Something we were all too blind to see because we were so focused on the monsters we knew about. After school, I went back to the library. I spent another 2 hours reading articles and taking notes. I learned that addiction could start with something as simple as a doctor prescribing pain medication after an injury. I learned that peer pressure wasn't always obvious, that sometimes it was subtle, friends offering to help you feel better or relax or escape from stress. I learned that addiction didn't discriminate, that it could happen to smart kids, good kids, that the biggest danger wasn't always the first time someone used drugs. It was all the times after that, when their brains started changing, when they started needing it instead of just wanting it, when they couldn't stop, even if they tried. When I got home that evening, I found Dad in the garage going through boxes of Ryan's stuff that they'd brought back from his dorm. He was holding one of Ryan's old baseball trophies, just staring at it with tears running down his face. "Dad?" I said softly. He looked up, quickly wiping his eyes. "Hey, Case, I was just, sorting through some things." I sat down on the concrete floor next to him. "Can I help?" He nodded and handed me a box. We went through it together in silence, pulling out textbooks and notebooks and clothes. At the bottom of the box, I found something that made my heart stop. A small plastic bag with white powder residue in it. Next to it, a bent spoon and a lighter. Dad saw it at the same time I did. His whole body went rigid. "I'll throw it away," he said, his voice tight. "Wait," I said. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of it. Dad looked at me like I was crazy. "Why would you want a picture of that?" "Because we need to remember," I said. "We need to know what it looks like. We need to be able to recognize it." Dad stared at me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "You're right," he said. "You're absolutely right." He threw the bag and the spoon and the lighter in the trash, and we kept sorting through the rest of Ryan's things. There were photos of him with his friends from college, photos of him smiling and looking happy. In some of the later ones, though, I could see the changes if I looked closely. His eyes looked different, emptier somehow. His smile didn't quite reach them anymore. We'd all seen the photos when he'd posted them online. We'd all thought he looked fine, maybe just tired from studying. We hadn't known what we were really looking at. That night at dinner, none of us ate much. We just pushed food around our plates and pretended everything was normal. Finally, Mom broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she said, "about Ryan, about what happened to him." Dad and I both looked at her. "I keep wondering if there were signs we missed, things we should have noticed." Her voice was shaky but determined. "I don't want to miss them again. Not with Casey, not with anyone." "What do you mean?" Dad asked. "I mean, I want to learn about this, about addiction and drugs and all of it. I want to know what to look for so we can help people before it's too late." I felt something tight in my chest, loosen just a little. "I've been researching it," I said. "At the library, I've been taking notes." Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Can you show me?" After dinner, I brought down all my notes and we sat at the kitchen table going through them. Together, Mom read every article I'd printed out, asked questions about things she didn't understand. Dad joined us after a while, and we talked for hours about warning signs and risk factors and how addiction worked. "It's not like the rules here," I said at one point. "It's not clear-cut. Someone can hide it really well. They can seem fine on the outside while everything's falling apart on the inside." "But there are still signs," Mom said, reading through my notes. "Behavioral changes, physical symptoms, social withdrawal. We just have to know what to look for. And we have to actually look," Dad added quietly. "Not just assume everything's fine because we want it to be." We stayed up late into the night, and for the first time since Ryan died, I felt like maybe we could do something. Maybe we couldn't bring Ryan back, but we could learn from what happened to him. We could try to help other people. The next day at school, I couldn't stop watching Tyler. He came in late to first period, and when the teacher asked him for a hall pass, he just mumbled something and slumped into his seat. His hands were shaking. During lunch, I saw him in the bathroom, and he was bent over the sink, splashing water on his face. When he looked up and saw me in the mirror, his eyes were wide and panicked. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm fine," he said quickly, too quickly, "just not feeling great." "Tyler, if something's wrong, if you need help..." I said I'm fine. He pushed past me and left. I stood there in the bathroom, my heart pounding. I knew that look. I'd seen it in the photos of Ryan. That desperate, cornered expression of someone who was drowning but didn't want anyone to know. I found Jen after school. "I need to talk to you about Tyler." We went to the parking lot and sat in her car. I told her everything I'd learned about addiction, about the signs I'd been seeing, about my suspicions. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You think Tyler's using drugs?" she finally asked. "I think it's possible, and I think if he is, he needs help before it's too late. But what if you're wrong? What if he really is just stressed or saw something supernatural? Then we'll figure that out, but Jen, what if I'm right and we do nothing?" I thought about Ryan, about how many people had seen him struggling and just assumed it was normal college stress. I can't watch someone else disappear and not try to do something. Jen chewed her lip, thinking. "Okay, so what do we do?" "We talked to Emma. She's his girlfriend. If anyone would know what's really going on with him, it's her." We found Emma in the school library, studying for a chemistry test. When we asked if we could talk to her privately, she looked worried but followed us outside. "Is this about Tyler?" she asked before we could even say anything. "Yeah," I said. "We're worried about him." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I am too. Something's really wrong and he won't tell me what it is. He keeps saying he's fine, that it's just stress. But I know it's more than that. He's disappearing on me. Sometimes he'll just vanish for hours and won't tell me where he was. He's lost so much weight. He's always sick or shaking or sweating. And yesterday I saw marks on his arms that he tried to hide." My stomach dropped. "What kind of marks?" "Like bruises, or maybe needle marks." "I don't know." She was crying now. I asked him about them, and he got so angry he's never gotten angry with me before. He said I was being paranoid and controlling. Jen and I exchanged looks. "Emma," I said gently, "I think Tyler might be using drugs." She closed her eyes. "I know. I've been trying not to think it, trying to convince myself it was something else. But I know." "We need to tell someone," Jen said. "An adult. Someone who can actually help him." "But what if he hates me?" Emma whispered. "What if I tell someone and he never forgives me?" I thought about Ryan again, about how he'd died alone in his dorm room while everyone who loved him had no idea how bad things had gotten. "What if you don't tell someone and something happens to him?" I said. "What if he ends up like my brother?" Emma sobbed and nodded. Okay, you're right. Who do we tell?" We decided on Mrs. Palmer, the school counselor. She was kind and actually listened to students instead of just lecturing them. The three of us went to her office and explained everything. Mrs. Palmer's expression grew more serious as we talked. "You girls did the right thing coming to me," she said when we finished. "I'm going to speak with Tyler and his parents. This kind of situation requires immediate intervention." "Will he be okay?" Emma asked. "I can't make any promises," Mrs. Palmer said honestly. "But getting help now gives him a much better chance than waiting until things get worse." After we left the counselor's office, Emma hugged me tight. "Thank you," she said, "for caring enough to say something." I hugged her back, thinking about how I wished someone had said something about Ryan. How I wished he'd had friends around him who recognized the signs and spoke up. That evening, Mrs. Palmer called my mom. They talked for a long time, and when Mom hung up, she told me that Tyler's parents were getting him help. He was going to an evaluation center that night, and depending on what they found, he might go to a treatment program. Mrs. Palmer said you were very brave, Mom told me, that you might have saved Tyler's life. I didn't feel brave. I felt scared and sad and angry that this was even necessary. Angry that kids had to watch out for this kind of danger on top of all the supernatural things we already dealt with. Mom, I said, I want to do more. I want to help make sure other people know about this. What do you have in mind? I thought about Ryan's notebook, about all those rules he'd collected to keep people safe from the monsters in Ridgemont Heights. I want to create something like Ryan's rule book, but for the real dangers that don't announce themselves. Mom pulled me into a hug. I think that's a wonderful idea, sweetheart, and I think Ryan would be proud of you. Over the next few days, I worked on creating a guide, not a simple list of rules like Ryan had kept, because addiction and mental health and all these real-world dangers weren't that simple. But I compiled warning signs, resources, hotline numbers, information about how to help someone who was struggling. I made it clear and easy to understand, written in a way that teenagers could relate to. I worked on it every night after school, sitting at my desk with Ryan's notebook open beside me. Sometimes I'd stop and read through his rules again, his careful handwriting documenting every danger in Ridgemont Heights. The gentleman in gray, the counting children, the hanging woman, all these monsters with their clear patterns and predictable behaviors. And then I'd look at my own pages, at the messy, complicated reality of addiction and mental illness and all the invisible ways people could be hurting. It took me 2 weeks to finish. When I was done, I had a 20-page booklet that covered everything I'd learned: signs of drug use and addiction, warning signs for depression and anxiety, how to talk to someone who was struggling, how to get help, local and national resources, information about Narcan and how it could save someone's life during an overdose, stories from families who'd lost people, including Ryan's story, which Mom and Dad gave me permission to share. On the last page, I wrote something that had been forming in my mind since the funeral. In Ridgemont Heights, we've always known that monsters are real. We've learned the rules to survive them. We've taught our children to count with the counting children, to never open doors during the gentleman's hour, to respect the boundaries that keep us safe from supernatural harm. But there are other monsters in this world, ones that don't follow rules we can write down. They don't knock first. They don't announce themselves. They slip in quietly through pain, through stress, through loneliness and fear. They disguise themselves as relief, as escape, as something that makes you feel better, at least for a little while. And by the time you realize what they really are, they've already got their hooks in you. We can't write simple rules to protect ourselves from these monsters, but we can learn to recognize them. We can learn to talk about them instead of pretending they don't exist. We can learn to help each other before it's too late. My brother Ryan knew every rule about every supernatural thing in this town. He could have survived any of them, but he couldn't survive the thing that doesn't follow rules. Maybe if we'd all known what to look for, if we'd all been paying attention to the right dangers, he'd still be here. I can't bring Ryan back, but I can try to make sure that what happened to him helps save someone else. I made copies of the booklet at the library, 50 of them. Then I started leaving them in places where people would find them. The school library, the community center, the coffee shop where teenagers hung out. I left one on every table at the diner. I put them in the waiting room at the doctor's office and the dentist. Some people thought I was crazy, but other people got it. Mrs. Martinez, whose light had come on during the gentleman's hour but who'd followed the rule and not opened her door, stopped me on the street one day. I read your booklet, she said. My nephew in the city, he's been struggling with addiction for years. I never really understood it before. I thought he was just being weak, making bad choices. But your booklet helped me see it differently. I called him yesterday. We talked for the first time in months. Mr. Fisher, who'd lost his dog to the Henderson place, came to our house with tears in his eyes. My daughter, he said to my parents, she's been at college, and I've been worried about her. After reading what Casey wrote, I called her, really talked to her. She admitted she's been having a hard time, that she's been drinking too much, using pills to help her study. We're getting her help. Thank you. More stories came. A mom who recognized the signs in her son and got him into counseling before things got worse. A teacher who noticed a student showing warning signs and connected them with resources. A kid from school who reached out to the hotline number after reading about depression symptoms and realizing they needed help. Tyler Morrison came back to school 3 weeks after we'd talked to Mrs. Palmer. He looked different, healthier. His eyes were clearer. He found me in the hallway one day and pulled me aside. I wanted to say thank you, he said. Emma told me you were the one who figured out what was going on, that you pushed her to tell someone. I'm just glad you're okay, I said. I'm not all the way okay yet, he admitted. I'm in outpatient treatment. It's hard, really hard, but I'm alive, and I'm trying, and that's something. He paused. I read your booklet, the part about your brother. I'm sorry. Me too. The thing is, I thought I was being careful. I thought I was in control. It started with just trying something at a party, you know? Everyone else was doing it, and I didn't want to be the weird one who said no. And then it became this thing I did to deal with stress, and then it became this thing I needed. And by the time I realized I couldn't stop, I was in way too deep. He looked down at his hands. Your brother's story, the way you wrote about how he was smart and careful and it still happened to him, that really hit me, because that's exactly how it was for me. We stood there in the hallway while other students rushed past us, and I thought about how many of them might be struggling with something invisible. How many might need help but were too scared to ask for it. Tyler, I said, would you be willing to talk to people about your experience, to help them understand? He thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I think I would. Over the next few months, Tyler and I started giving presentations at school about addiction and mental health. Emma joined us too, talking about what it was like to watch someone you love struggle and not know how to help. Other people came forward with their own stories. Sarah Hendricks admitted she'd been dealing with an eating disorder. Michael Torres talked about his depression. Jessica Park shared that she'd been self-harming as a way to cope with anxiety. The more we talked about these invisible monsters, the less power they seemed to have. Not because they became less dangerous, but because people stopped facing them alone in the dark. My mom started a support group for parents at the community center. Dad volunteered to speak at the high school about recognizing warning signs. Mrs. Palmer worked with the school district to implement better mental health resources and drug education programs that actually talked about reality instead of just saying, don't do drugs. I still keep Ryan's notebook. I read through it sometimes looking at all his carefully documented rules, and I've added to it now, filling those blank pages at the end with everything I've learned about the dangers that don't follow patterns. It's messier than Ryan's neat entries, but it's just as important. Because here's what I've figured out. In Ridgemont Heights, we live alongside supernatural monsters. We've learned their rules, and we've adapted. We've made peace with the fact that our neighborhood isn't normal, that we have to be vigilant in ways other people don't understand. But the real monsters, the ones that kill more people than the gentleman in gray or the counting children or the hanging woman ever could, those monsters are everywhere. They're in every city and every small town. They're in suburban neighborhoods and rural communities. They don't care if you know the rules or if you're careful or if you come from a good family. The difference is that these monsters can be fought, not with rules about when to open your door or which roads to avoid, but with awareness and compassion and the willingness to actually see when someone is struggling, with the courage to speak up even when it's uncomfortable, with the understanding that asking for help isn't weakness and offering help isn't overstepping. Ryan died because he broke a rule none of us knew existed. But his death taught me that sometimes the most important rules aren't about avoiding danger. They're about facing it, talking about it, and helping each other survive it. I still live in Ridgemont Heights. I still follow all the old rules. I don't open my door between 3 and 4 in the morning. I count along with the counting children. I don't hum near storm drains or whistle near the oak tree. But now I follow other rules too. I pay attention to the people around me. I look for the warning signs. And every time I add a new entry to Ryan's notebook, documenting another person who got help in time, another life that didn't end the way his did, I think about what he used to tell me. At least our monsters are predictable. He was wrong about that. But he was right about something else he once said. We're lucky we know what to expect. We just had to learn to expect the right things.